We're on. Okay.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. This is one of the probably one of the most important chapters. There's a lot going on. It's a condensed information, but there is a lot going on. They are they're on the threshold of Jordan. They're going to be coming into the promised land. But these are the things that take place. There's a preparation that takes place. God generally, or will sometimes, prepare us in certain ways and allow certain things to happen, and things like that before He takes us on our journey. And in this case, this is the way that it happens. And there was some things that had to be rectified and some things that had to be taken care of. And so we're going to see those almost immediately. So in Joshua chapter 5, this is the one of the things, if you remember, from the two spies that went in with Rahab, and they were told and informed that when the people had heard all the things that God had done, that their hearts were melted like wax. And that's one of the things that we're going to read here. The people seeing these things, and in addition, the news has gotten out, as we're going to see, about what happened at the Jordan. So in verse 1, chapter 5 of Joshua, it reads, "Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how Yahweh had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel." So they heard the things that God had done. And if you remember, He backed up the river, essentially, stopped it. They walked over on dry land, and it had backed up and almost like it had congealed, turned into kind of a gelatinous kind of a thing. But it backed up and into different far-reaching cities until the whole entire people had come across. And so that's what they're seeing, that there's a supernatural aspect of what is happening with the Israelites. It's not just these people, which there's over 2 million people, presumably. And many of them, there's a few 100,000 warriors that are coming. And it's not just those things that are making them have this great fear. It's the fact that they're seeing something supernatural happen. And there's eyewitnesses. So imagine hearing that. You see all these supernatural things or hear about them, and they're freaked out. And remember that at this time, every nation or every people, they had their own deity. So they had individual deities for every single one of these different peoples. And so they're seeing that this God of the Israelites, this Yahweh, they knew Him by name now. They're saying that this God in particular is different because He's showing up in ways that no other God has. And so that's one of the reasons why their hearts had melted and why there was no spirit in them anymore. Verse 2. So that opens up there's a lot going on there in just the first verse of chapter 5. Now in verse 2, he says, "At that time, Yahweh said to Joshua, 'Make for yourselves flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel a second time.'" So this is right before they're getting in the battle. Imagine being one of the military guys. Yeah, we'll read about it. And that's one of the first things that Joshua has to do. He's got to make a flint knife, and the men have to come forward and be cut up to prepare for war. One of the things that we can take from that spiritually is God does that oftentimes with His people. He'll let us go through some very painful and hurtful things in order to prepare us for the battle. And that's one of the things. But there was also a sanctification process. There was something that had to happen. It was part of the law, and we're going to see that. So he says, first of all, make a flint knife and circumcise again the sons of Israel. Now, these are the men from 30 and up, or from 20 and up, to about the age of 50, that were not circumcised, and these are the warriors. You remember, up to 50 years old, they were asked, or they were considered to be part of the warriors. And after that, they basically could retire in a sense, but it was only, it wasn't a total retirement.
Okay, a second time.
Yes.
So
Let's-
you were
let's-
circumcised once. Now you're getting circumcised.
Well, he's going to explain that, because it sounds like that's what's going on.
Or
is that
it
there's
the
gonna be-
ones that
It's, yeah,
weren't?
it's
Okay.
going to be, look at verse 3. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Haraloth. Now, one of the things to remember is there was Joshua and Caleb were still around. So they didn't have to do this because they had already taken part of that when they went out 3 days from Egypt in Exodus. So now he's the one that's in charge of having this happen and having this being done. And it says in verse 4, and this is the reason why, to answer all your questions, why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all of the men of war, they died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. So that did happen with them. And then he says, for all the people, in verse 5, who came out were circumcised, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So when it's second time, it's not that they had to give themselves a second time. It was that now they did that when they were in, coming out of Egypt, and now they're going to prepare for
Next
war.
generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was part of the covenant that God had made with the Israelites. Is the covenant of circumcision. Let's see. Circumcision. The covenant of circumcision is part of that all the males had to have the circumcised. And remember, when they were born, when they were children, it was on the 8th day. But these are grown men, and so they had to go through this. And it was every one of them had to have this happen. So as they're being circumcised, as it says, this is the reason why it says that this is the second time. It really wasn't the second time per se per person.
Yeah.
It's that it happened one time in mass, and now it's going to happen again. And so this is what it's talking about. And then it says in verse 6, for the sons of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, that is, the men of war who came out of Egypt perished because they did not listen to the voice of Yahweh, to whom Yahweh had sworn that he would not let them see the land which the Lord Yahweh had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So because of that fact, they're now having to do this, and this is in preparation for war, because they're going to go in and take the land.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of the things that they had to do, because this is a covenant. The covenant is something that God made with the people. This is a sign. So a covenant is a sign. And it is a sign to the people and the people around them that they belonged to Yahweh. They belonged to the Lord. And so that was one of the reasons, and they had to be right before God so that he would go with them. And the ones who wandered in the desert, as soon as the last one died, immediately on that day, boom, everything switched. So verse 7, and their children whom he raised up in their place, Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not circumcised them along the way. Now, it came about when they had finished circumcising, which would have taken a pretty long time.
Well,
we're-
that says all the nation.
Yeah,
It's not like just a neighborhood or something.
yeah, yeah. So it was pretty time consuming. I'm sure it took a few days, and then it says, or if not longer, and because we're not told exactly how much time passed, but it came about when they had finished circumcising all the nation, that they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. That makes sense. They're not going to do much afterwards. And then it says in verse 9, and Yahweh said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. Gilgal literally means rolling away. Rolling away the uncircumcision, the extra flesh, if you will. And that's one of the things about circumcision. It's a sign of the flesh being cut away. So that was one of the things that took place there. And that's what one of the first things that they're told to do as they prepare to go into the land. Verse 10, while the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day, the month, on the desert plains of Jericho. And on the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. Now, this is a really important fact because now they're practicing the Passover. So the angel of death, if you remember from Exodus, had passed over the houses that had the blood on the doorposts and on the lintel. And in the same way, they're now preparing to go into the land and preparing to go into battle. And what are they doing? They're worshiping. That's one of the main things about the differences between the people of God and the secular people who don't believe in God or say that they don't believe in God, who reject the idea of God, is that one of the things that's important for the preparation is worship. So worship is an important part of the getting ready for the battle. And, just to bring it to a more recent time, that's why I keep saying Sunday after Sunday, we are still in the battle. We're still in the war. We seen a battle won. We were granted some time, but we're still in the battle. We're still in the war, and there's a war to be fought. And how hard we decide to fight on it, I think God will move accordingly. But it's just one of the things where when we're in a state of war, one of the things that's important is to not lose sight of the fact that we are to worship. We're worshiping people. We're people who worship God, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the what's going on in the world, the situation. We are people of worship, first and foremost. We're people who trust that God is doing what He does, and we don't have to worry about those things. We let Him take care of it. But we just do what we're told, and we go into, in a sense, and what we're told to do is to worship God, to not forget Him. Just like He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. We're to do the same. And then He says, and the manna ceased on that day. So if you notice in verse 11, they ate some of the produce of the land. This is, they're going back to a natural diet. God's no longer going to spoon feed them, because the manna ceased on that day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land. So God is basically saying, okay, now you guys have to go be human beings, and now that this land is going to be yours, you have to eat off of the land. And it's not that God couldn't continue to provide for them, because if you remember, the manna was provided by God so that they didn't have to worry about food. During their whole 40 years in the wilderness, they never had to worry about it. They complained about it, but they never had to worry about it. But on that day, it just ceased. So it would be kind of weird thinking about it, because all of the adults, all of the children would have experienced it for who knows how long. That's all they've ever known.
Yeah,
and now they're going into
any of the children.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so they would have saw this. It's like, we don't see this. It's no longer there. So one of the things too is what you see going on here is one of the things that we have to rely upon. Faith. Now they have to go by faith. God's no longer spoon hand feeding them. Now they're having to go out by faith. Okay, God said we can do this because he's going to be with us. But now we're going to be having to take in our own sustenance. So there's that responsibility that's given to them, but it's a responsibility also of faith and by faith. So that's what's being introduced here. Now you guys are going to have to go out and you're going to start doing what it is that I told you would happen. Is this is a land of milk and honey. What is milk and honey?
Abundance.
It's abundance. It's sustenance. It's provision. It's wherever you go, you're going to be provided for. It's going to be there, but you're still going to have to do stuff. And then it says, so they had eaten some of the produce. When they had eaten the produce, the manna ceased, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. So now their diets changed, their provisions have changed, there are things that are going on now that they have to, they just have to trust God, and it's an act of faith. Verse 13. Now, it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing opposite him, with his sword drawn in his hand. Now, you see a guy that you've never seen before, a man, and he's got his sword drawn. That's usually taken as an act of war or something's going to happen. So Joshua has this response when he sees that in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, rather indeed, I indeed come now as captain of the host of Yahweh." So this is the captain of the Lord of hosts. Okay. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth. So Joshua knew what he was saying. He's not just any certain person. He is different. He understood that this is a spiritual encounter. This is a supernatural encounter. And so he falls on his face to the earth, as it says, and he bowed down. That's worship.
Yeah.
And he said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" That's humility. Here you have the leader of an entire nation, and he's bowing to this person who just said, "I've come as the captain of the Lord of hosts." And he has the right response. He's humble. He bows before him on his face, and he worships. And he's having this response because it is the Spirit of God moving upon him, I believe. And he notice that he says, "I'm your servant," immediately. And he calls him Lord. And in verse 15, and the captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy."
Oh, gosh,
And
exactly.
Joshua
As
did
Moses.
Yeah.
So who's this one that's speaking? This is again the same God who spoke in the burning bush. This is the same person. This is the same voice. This is the voice that Moses would have heard. This is a pre-incarnate. This is another, most likely, another
Christophany.
Christophany or a theophany. It's another Christophany or it's another theophany at the very least. And you have this response, and he says, "Take your sandals off because the ground on which you're standing is holy." Why is it holy? Because of who it is that's saying this, and then whose presence that Joshua has found himself in.
Just like in the burning bush.
Yeah. He's having the same response, and he's being told the same thing, just like Moses was told before Moses began his journey, before Moses began to do what God was. Basically, he was coming into another battle. He was going to battle with the Pharaoh of Egypt, but he was getting prepared for the same thing. And Joshua, before he goes into the land, is being told the very same thing, that where you're standing right now is holy. And it's holy because of who is saying this. And this is, again, more than likely a pre-incarnate. Pre-incarnate Christ. So when people say that Jesus never said this or that about homosexuality or transgenderism or all those things, it's because, number one, they have no idea who Jesus is. And sadly, it's Christians that will say this also. They'll say, well, Jesus never said this, or it's people who call themselves Christians. Mm-hmm. I saw some video clips. I don't remember if it was last night or this morning, but some blasphemous people that call themselves Christians who are saying these kinds of things. And they were trying to essentially say that, you know, if you think that the Bible says anything negative about homosexuality or transgenderism or any of these other things, that you're wrong, because Jesus never said anything about that. It's like, well, you don't know this Christ. You don't know who Jesus really is. He's just a person to you. He's just a good teacher or something. He's not God, the same God that we're reading here. And that's why I said earlier that before we started, that we'll see that as I was praying, that people that often mistakenly say that the God of the Old Testament is this mean, angry God who's warlike and has people do terrible things is not the same as the one that we see in the New Testament. It's like, no, it's the very same one, the very same God. And that's the thing. Here he is right here showing himself. And in a way, it would be nice if we went into more detail to find out what was being said, but we get shifted immediately to the next scenes. But what's important to understand is God prepares you before the war. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes what you got to go through is going to cost you, and it could be painful, and it could be something that is not very fun. It might be a horrible experience, and it may be something that deeply wounds you. But God is going to be in it, and he's going to be doing that in preparation for you to get ready for battle and to get ready for the war. And that's what we're seeing here. And ultimately, Jesus reveals himself, or God reveals himself as the Lord of hosts. And here, this is the same Christ that the world is going to encounter when he returns. This is the captain of the Lord of hosts. This is the one who's going to be leading the charge. This is the one who's going to be becoming the king, returning to conquer his land, to conquer his world. This warrior with his sword drawn. And we see that in the book of Revelation. His sword is drawn, and he deals with his enemies, a death blow, and it's pretty horrific. So that's chapter 5, and that's why I said it's probably one of the most important and the most filled chapters that there is in the book of Joshua. I think we might be able to get through part of 6 or most of it. So let's continue to read, because there's victory and then there's defeat. Chapter 6. Now Jericho was tightly shut because the sons of Israel, no one went out and no one came in. And Yahweh said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and its valiant warriors. And you shall march around the city, all the men of war, circling the city once, and you shall do so for 6 days. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark, verse 4. Then on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead. So they were to go And the priests were to lead the concession or the procession with the trumpets. And they'd go around the city once. But in the first time that they went around, apparently it was silent. So imagine being in the city, you're standing on the walls, you're watching, you're seeing this huge mass of military going around your city, and they're just marching.
Every day for 6
Yeah,
days.
every day, once a day.
Yeah.
One time. And they would go around. Imagine being inside of that city, how terrifying that would ultimately get. Seeing this day after day after day after day, wondering what the heck is going on. And imagine being Joshua, being told this. This is your war strategy. You're going to circle the city once every day for 6 days. The seventh day will be slightly different. And so, as it says here, and it shall be when they make the long blast in the ram's horn in verse 5, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the walls of the city shall fall down flat, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead. So on the seventh day, that's what they would do. They would blow the trumpet, every one of them would shout, and then the walls would just come crashing down. And the walls came
13 times they
tumbling
walked
down.
around the city.
Yep. It's
Right?
yep,
7.
Yeah.
6, yeah, 13.
6 times prior, and then the 7 times on the
On the
seventh day.
day.
So that's and even think about that. So you see them once every day for 6 days, and then all of a sudden it's not once,
It's 7.
it's not twice, but it's 7 times. And on the 7th time, you hear this, and then you hear, oh, and then the walls just start crumbling. It would be really freaky. And that's what God said, this is your strategy. When we go to battle, oftentimes God will have us do things that don't sound like, this doesn't sound like a good idea to me, God. But this is what God says, no, this is your battle plan. This is what you're to do. And this is an act of faith. Because these are military guys. They know what to do. They know how to kill somebody. They know how to fight.
Yeah.
And he
We're
says,
not
no,
the
this
band. We're not
is
marching.
this is what you're going to do, and this is your battle plan, and this is an act of faith on the part of the people, and this is how they're beginning to take over the land.
So I have a question though, the wall.
Yeah.
So in some of the other cities, you talked about how people lived
Uh-huh.
within the wall.
Yeah.
So is this
Yeah.
probably a wall like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got people, their
Yeah.
homes just
Yeah, and the
coming out
one
from under them.
the one area that you'd want to be in is where Rahab lived. That's the one place that you would want to live, on the wall, because she lived in the wall. If you remember, her house was within the wall.
Well, that's what.
And there was people within the city walls, but she lived on the outer perimeter there in the wall. So apparently it was structured so that you could have a living space within the wall. So you can imagine how big those walls were. They weren't just small, tiny little things like this. A
But
2x4
where she
wall.
lived is
Yeah.
what would have been crumbling
Yeah, except
because it's the exterior
remember, we're
wall,
dealing with a
right?
supernatural thing. So that's where you'd want to be, is where Rahab was, because that would be the one place that would be safe until she got out.
Oh, where she
Yes, where she
specifically was, yeah.
specifically is.
But what
That's
I'm
where you would
saying
be.
is
Yeah, the rest of the walls would have been, yeah.
that's where, I mean, because she lived on the outer perimeter wall,
Mhm.
that's the wall that's crumbling. All these other inner city walls, there's
Yeah, the one that gives them access to go in and
Inside,
take over the
okay.
city. Yeah, these were the protective walls. The walls that were outside, they were protecting. And that's why they said they shut the gates.
yeah.
There was no one going in, no one going out. And that's what was going to that's what was falling down here. Verse 6. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of horns, ram's horns, before the ark of Yahweh. So God is going into the battle with them through the symbol of what this ark meant. If you remember, the ark represented the presence of God within the people. This is his power that he's showing, his glory. The ark would go, and remember, it's not just any old ark. It's not just a box. This is a box that's overlaid inside and out with gold. The rings were gold. The poles were wood, but they were all foiled with gold. So it's a pretty amazing thing to watch, this shiny box walking around, and it represented the presence of God to the people. And the priests are the one who go out in front. That's the difference between the people of God and the people who are secular, who have no God, or the people who have false gods. Is worship is part of the battle. And so this was an important part of the deal. The priests were to go, and the priests were the ones who represented all the ceremonies and the things that brought the people at one with God. They were the ones who represented the people and who represented them before God. And so that's one of the reasons why they're going up first. He says, let the 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of Yahweh. Verse 7, then he said to the people, go forward and march around the city, and let the armed men go on before the ark of the Lord, of Yahweh. And it was so. And when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before Yahweh went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of Yahweh followed them. And the armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while they continued to blow the trumpets. But Joshua commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor let a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout, then you shall all shout. So they were making noise, so it wasn't just a silent one. I was wrong in that regard. So they were blowing the trumpet, but that was it. So you had this trumpet blowing as they were going around the one time. Verse 11. So he had the ark of the Lord taken around the city, circling it once. Then they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Now imagine the military guys. This is our battle plan. I thought we were going to go into fight. What's going on? Just got to trust God. We got to trust Yahweh. Yeah. Verse 12. Now Joshua rose up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. So they're going to do it all again. And the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of Yahweh went on continually and blew the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of Yahweh, while they continued to blow the trumpets. Thus the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did so for 6 days. Verse 15, then it came about on the 7th day that they arose early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they marched around the city the 7 times, and it came about at the 7th time, when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for Yahweh has given you the city, and the city shall be under the ban, and it and all that is in it belongs to Yahweh. Only Rahab the harlot and all who were with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, lest you covet them and take some of the things under the ban. So you would make the camp of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. Now, this is going to be important in the next chapter to remember this little detail. He's warning them, don't be tempted by all the stuff around you. Just leave it alone. It belongs to God. That's his booty, if you will. Because he says, as for you, do not keep yourselves from the things under the ban. Verse 19, but all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to Yahweh. They shall go into the treasury of Yahweh. So the people shouted, the priests blew the trumpets, And it came about when the people heard the sound of the trumpet that the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. So presumably what we're seeing here is around the walls, they were totally encircled by this whole army. And as soon as those walls came in, all they had to do was just walk on in. Most of the fighting had already been done for them. Because that was one thing that kept people and armies from invading was those walls. But if there's no walls there, and you're already there, and there's nothing they can do about it, it's easy pickings. And it says here in verse 21, and they utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, and young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. And Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the harlot's house and bring the woman and all she has out of there, as you have sworn to her. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. And they also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. Now Rahab, she's important for a couple of different reasons. She took it as an act of faith. If you remember, she heard about all the stuff about Yahweh and all the things that he was doing with Israel. She said, he's the God. He's the God of heaven. He's the real God. There ain't no fooling around with this God. He's the God of gods. We have our gods, but he's the real God. He's the one who does stuff, and he's with his people. And so Rahab, in her act of faith, she was so convincing to her relatives that she said, just come to me and I'll take care of you and you'll be safe here. And it sounds like she had quite a bit of her family that were saved because of this. It's an amazing story, really, because here you have one of the Gentiles, a Canaanite woman, and she has enough faith in God. She has enough fear of the Lord that her family apparently did too, so that they, I would imagine, all became worshipers of Yahweh. They were saved. As it says here, they placed them outside the camp of Israel. And in verse 24, and they burned the city with fire and all that was in it. Only the silver and the gold articles of bronze and iron they put in the treasury of the house of Yahweh. However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared, and she has lived in the midst of Israel, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Then Joshua made them take an oath at that time, saying, cursed before Yahweh is the man who rises up and builds this city Jericho. With the loss of his firstborn, he shall lay its foundation, and with the loss of his youngest son, he shall set up its gates. So Yahweh was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So Joshua, he's the new Moses, and he's the one, he's not the prophet that Moses promised, but he is a prophet in the sense that God was using him directly, and God was showing the people, his own people, I'm with Joshua just like I was with Moses, but he's also showing the people of the land, of the Canaanites, this guy has God with him. God is with him, and he's going to perform what he does. And so he had a reputation that went out throughout all the land, that found out about all the things that happened here. So it's an amazing thing that is going on here, and that's part of the deal, is that Joshua is this warrior king, but he's not really a king because they didn't have kings back then. But essentially, that's the part that he's playing. He's the one who's leading, and like Jesus, he's the one who leads and guides, and he's the one who gives us the courage to do what we ought to do. And so they begin their first battle. It's a success. It's a astounding success. And imagine the rest of the people, the Canaanites. The walls just came tumbling down. Jericho was one of the most fortified cities, and it was easy pickings. One of the things, too, that I want to touch on, I've touched on this before. Here's one of the instances where God had commanded that his people They wipe out everything. So it wasn't just men, adult men and women. It was children. It was the old. Some people will kind of accuse God and his people of genocide. But God here, what they never think about is how horrible the people were of this land. Have you ever seen the, let's see, what's the name of that? Gosh, I can't think of the name of the show. Mel Gibson with the Aztecs. Apocalypto. Yeah, if you've ever seen that, that's how the indigenous people were. They were terrible. There was one reason why people called them savages here in this country. They weren't just social, civil people. They were doing what they all did. They were savages. That's what they did. They would enslave people. They would murder people. They would murder women and children. They would take them as slaves. They were slave owners. They did all these things. They were so all of these things, and they were idolaters. They worshipped all these demon gods. And so God said, wipe them all out. Now there was a couple of reasons. Number one, because of their sin, they had to, God judged them, and so they paid for their sins. But the other thing was they would be less of an influence on the people. The less of these people, if it's kind of the idea of out of sight, out of mind. If there's nobody there to corrupt you, the less chances of you being corrupt. Although these people were already corrupt, as we read all the way Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We saw all the stuff where they rebelled right from the get-go. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. They've gotten their first victory at Jericho, and it's a big victory. And so they're beginning to do their things. And notice that he's, I think to this day, their Jericho has not been rebuilt. It's still just ruins. And but we can go there today. We can go there today. Unlike the LDS faith that has all these made-up places, we can actually go to these historical sites and see them and visit them and see them. And by the way, one of the things, I was going to pull up this video, but I don't know if you've seen, there's a news article that's been going around for about the last, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month and a half, where they have actually found in the Middle East, I can't remember exactly the location. I want to say it was Syria, Iraq. It was one of those areas of the world. In a prison, they had dug down and they found where what they believe is one of the earliest churches, the church buildings where people would gather and worship. And we're talking about Christians. And there, in the mosaic that they had these people who were probably men and women of wealth. They dedicated this floor, and it sounds like they were the ones that did it. And one of the things that this is really early on in the Christian faith, and one of the things that's built into the floor that still survives is they're giving praise to Jesus, God. He's not just Jesus Christ and Jesus, the Son of God. They're actually attributing to him the fact that he is God. Jesus is God. And one of the reasons why that's a big thing, if you haven't seen that article, look it up. I forgot to pull it up, but it's important because it shows that the early Christians, unlike this nonsense that you hear on the internet, early Christians and also people who really don't give authority to the Bible that it needs to have, that the early church believed that Jesus is God, just like the apostles did. They believed that Jesus was God. And they always try to make this argument, well, they didn't believe that. It was like, well, no, they did, and so did the people. Because here you have this place that's in history. You see this floor, this beautiful mosaic, and it's a fish symbol, which was concurrent with all the Christian theology and the teachings and how they would greet one another and all the things. This is one of the things that is exciting for the Christian world, because it shows that early on, Jesus was considered God. So they're having less and less of that argumentation that they can make, because there haven't been those early enough finds. But this one is without a doubt, and it names people, the people who actually contributed to make these things. If you're interested in that article, I'll look it up and then I can send it to you, or But like that, Jericho, what's that?
Send it in the chat.
Did you say something about a prison?
Yeah.
Was it?
There was a prison built over it. And so as they were digging around, they started finding some things. And so they decided to keep on
Okay.
So they built the prison over the top of it. And I can't remember the exact location. It's in the article. But this is actually they started finding this, I want to say that as early as 2004. But it really hasn't come around to this kind of a discovery until fairly recently. So it's just all of a sudden started popping up in my feeds, and that's why. But the reason I'm saying that is because Jericho is the same thing. You can go there, you can see these things. They're historical. They're not just made up names, they're not just made up places. They're actual places where you can go. So if you go on a tour to go see these biblical places, they're not made up, they're real. You know, and I find it funny that, and it's kind of sad and ironic that you can go on the Book of Mormon tour. It's like, well, where are you going? Nobody knows where those supposed places are. Yeah, it's just that they're made up places. So where are you going to go? And you just basically have to make up a story as you go. Yeah,
How much are they charging for this tour?
it's
Doesn't
expensive.
sound you get to go anywhere.
Mhm.
Is it like
To the
Well, they take you. Yeah, they
It's
take
the Gilligan
you to
Islands
South
tour.
America.
That's what I was
It is,
thinking.
yeah.
3-hour tour.
This might have happened here. This might have happened there.
But yeah, it's pretty sad, but it's also kind of funny.
Who
And
gets to hold the hat and shake?
yeah. But here we have historical stuff, and it's archaeological, and you can find these places. Comments?
Laura has a question online. Did God save the bronze, silver, and gold, or was it taken out before the fire?
It was.
It's referencing verses 19 and 24.
It would have to have been taken before, because they put it in the sanctuary or the treasury.
Okay.
So that's what would have had to
Didn't
take
say
place.
it
Yeah, they collected all that
collected
stuff.
of it, and
Yeah.
then
So my guess is they probably
Set
killed all the
fire.
people, grabbed all the stuff, took it out of the city, put it in the treasury, and then
fire,
set everything on fire.
purification.
So it's a done deal, and they're moving on, and they're going to sadly find out a harsh lesson. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments, we'll close up and call it a night. Okay, Father, thank you so much for your goodness and your grace and your mercy, Lord. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for the fact that you go before us, Lord. No matter what the battle is, you fight our battles for us, and you fight our battles with us, and you prepare us and you strengthen us. And sometimes it's painful, sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it's very just a very unfriendly thing for us, and it's a horrible experience. But sometimes that's what you do in order to prepare us, and we're just so thankful that you remind us continuously that regardless of the situation, regardless of the circumstances, and regardless of the battle in front of us, Lord, you remind us that you're with us. You are God, Emmanuel, God with us. And Lord, we're so thankful. We're so thankful for the appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. We're so thankful that you show us that you will reveal yourself to whom you will, to strengthen us at the right time. And Lord, we're thankful that you are the God who can do all of these things, and you work in the supernatural, and you work in the reality of our world as we exist. And Lord, we're just so thankful that you can do both at the same time simultaneously. We're thankful, Lord, that you are that God, that amazing and awesome God. Lord, we thank you, we praise you, we bless you in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen.
What is I'm like half asleep. That verse where it says, "Knock and you shall